The first point on the list. Um, what are the messages that you received in your culture of origin, family of origin, about mental health or mental illness?
I can,
Uh,
unless you want to start, Spencer,
oh, go ahead.
I can open up the discussion. I am Vietnamese, so mental health and mental health illness is was definitely not talked about growing up. It was almost like if you had issues or if you have problems, it was more of a disciplinary kind of action rather than kind of talking about our emotions or seeing like what's underneath all of either whether it was like my brother acting out because he's the only boy out of five kids and so he had four sisters and so I saw a lot of that through him and how his emotions were kind of more so ignored because it was like you're the only boy, you need to toughen up. There's the more you acknowledge issues, the bigger the issue is. And so that's kind of how I grew up with mental health and mental health illness and feelings and emotions.
So I had kind of a different experience. The upper generations of my family, so like my great grandmother, my grandmother, they had kind of those messages, but clearly they also struggled with mental health. And so, like, my mom and sort of that generation of the family um, kind of had to build it up from scratch. So, like, we were okay to talk about these things, but we didn't really know how to talk about them in like a healthy, appropriate way. So like we had the messages that like this is okay, this is something that we need to engage with actively, but simultaneously we did it in a lot of ways that were um, kind of harmful or just kind of not super effective. Um, so like we had the message was there that like this is something we needed to deal with, but also we didn't really know how. So like that was kind of where I started out. So this is me like trying to figure out like the actual right way to do this.
So for me, my mom's side of the family were very much like therapy is amazing. Everyone should have it. Everyone's a little messed up. Everyone needs someone to talk to. Mama's side, I affectionately say, is sugar, spice, and everything white. So she is just like Northern European, like her family moved around. So she very much like there's no negative connotation with therapy on that side of the family. But my dad is full blood Portuguese, and his family is like mental problems. What do you mean? Mental issues, disorders? No, you're crazy. You just think you're overthinking. You're fine. When you rub some dirt in it, kind of situation. It especially is kind of neglected because my dad's side of the family is heavily invested in agriculture and that farmer mentality. Unless you've got an arm like swinging by the bone, by like an inch of bone off your shoulder, you're not going anywhere for help.
We got too much stuff to do.
Yeah.
I can go next. So my family is of Mexican origin, and I would say very similar to you, Julie. It like for me at least in my family, it just was not talked about. Like my sister and I always kind of joke that my parents had two emotions, and that was happiness and anger. Any other emotion was just like not there. um, I would say that we didn't really talk about it until I got older because I've always struggled with depression. And it wasn't until my symptoms kind of manifested, like physically, like crying all the time or things like that, where my mom was like, okay, do you need to go see somebody? So definitely more focused on physical, like actually being able to see it than just like, hey, I'm not feeling good or blah, blah, blah. Like if it was that way, it just was not talked about.
Um, yeah, after hearing everyone's, I have kind of like a mixed thing too with like Michaela, where my mom's side, my mom was always like more supportive messaging, where she always felt like education is power, seek out therapy, it's a tool to help you grow. But simultaneously on my dad's side, it was more like, especially he was really into sports culture and ew, don't want to go into all that, but it can get really toxic
Hmm.
in some areas where you have to like just push through it. Uh, I did softball, so a phrase I heard a lot was like, there's no crying in softball. So really belittling and don't show emotion or don't, yeah, it's a weakness. And so
Yeah.
mental health, you kind of had to minimize that. So different messaging. I'm thankful I had my mom's side or my mom. So that's where I stand with that.
Um, yeah, definitely seems like we're getting those cultural messages coming across. So like the other things that we're supposed to talk about, what resources were you aware of that were available for mental health, if any, when you were growing up or prior to pursuing your degree? If you weren't aware of resources, what do you think about that?
So I actually have a wee bit of a story. If I'll try to say it as quickly as possible so I don't take up too much time. During the summer, when my dad would harvest pistachios, they're on these big harvesters, and pistachio harvesters are known for catching on fire and exploding. Stay with me. I'm going somewhere with this. So during the summer, I would be on a quad and I was water girl. I would race basically water out to my dad and the guys out in the field so, they could have cold water. Well, I pull up to a harvester. One side's on fire, and the other side has Julio, who hasn't even noticed it's on fire. Um, I freak out, race over on my quad, yank him off, and pull away probably 2 seconds before that thing explodes. Um, Julio didn't approach a harvester for the rest of that season. He was petrified. He was probably that close to either getting an arm ripped off or just straight up dying. And he's got kids and a wife at home. So that was the first time I've ever seen someone have PTSD or a panic response or just anything of that nature. And then that same day was the first day I ever heard of anything referring to mental health because my dad said Julio would probably do well with a therapist, but he's not going to get one. And I remember asking, why? Are there not any available in Visalia? Because I was like, I don't know, 6? I didn't know. And my dad said, no, it's because he probably couldn't afford one.
Mm.
So that was the first time I learned of that resource. I knew that there were therapists in Visalia, but that was like the first inkling I ever got. And then it wasn't until way into high school that I was actually given proper resources and like, absolute locations to find MFTs.
Yeah. Uh, that's interesting because I grew up in the middle of a bunch of sort of not inner city, but like close enough to the city where I churned through a bunch of therapists as a kid. And like none of my experiences match up with what I'm being taught about working with children, right? Like the importance of play as a language. Like, nah, these were just like grouchy old white dudes sitting on a couch with you, like Freud looking guys. And it's just like, okay, dude, I don't know you. Why am I gonna open up to you? This is weird. So we churned through a bunch of them, and like I didn't understand at the time like what kind of privilege that was to like have access to that many therapists to burn through. Like it probably wouldn't have changed what happened, but like that's something that I internalized. Like, hey, you can look for the right therapist that works with you. And like, actually, a lot of people just can't. Like, that's just not something that they have in their area, or they just don't have the money, the institutional barriers. I just didn't know about until I was like probably in high school. Um, yeah, that was weird. Uh, uh, looks like we have like 2 minutes left ish.
Oh shoot.
Um, yeah, yeah, we're burning through time like really quick. And we have two other questions we have to answer.
Okay.
Um, but that's okay. Does anybody have anything else, like any other stories they want to share?
I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
know any resources up until high school, I would say. I didn't even know
Hmm.
what an MFT was growing up.
yeah,
So resources were slim when I was younger, but now I'm a behavioral counselor for K through 12. And so when I was that age, I didn't even know that didn't even exist on my campus, or my school district. So seeing how much of an impact I make for these younger kids, especially the K through 8, I wish that would have had those resources growing up, just because it is a really nice, you know, nice support that they can have at school, and away from the home. So that's something that
Hmm.
I really value.
yeah. Even just knowing those resources exist provides a certain comfort. Like even if you're not using them, just knowing that they are there for you carries a certain amount of weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we've got the two last ones. Sorry, unless anybody else wants to share.
I'm
No?
okay. We can move on.
Okay. So, we've got, what do you think that mental health stigma can contribute to cross-cultural barriers? I think we've kind of inadvertently covered that. But I'll hit the other one just so that we can, so that we know what's going on. What do you think that your own exposure to mental health stigma may influence your ability to prioritize self-care once you start seeing clients? What's your plan to prioritize self-care once you start seeing clients? And like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, self-care requires a routine. It requires me to like commit that this is the time where I am doing the thing that is self-care. Because if I don't, if I leave it sort of up in the air, I won't do it. I'll just put it off. I'll go, I can do that tomorrow. No, I won't. Tomorrow I'll run around and I'll say I can do that tomorrow again. So for me, like that's routine. You got to put it in there and say, I am going to do this right there. And then stick to that. But yeah, what anybody have an easy time with self-care in this group? Yeah.
It's a work in progress for me, but I think in the last 2 years, especially after COVID, I realize that it just comes crashing down. And if I don't take at least, a weekend away to the coast or something, it does catch up to me. But I think for me, the hardest part is getting over the guilt
Hmm.
of putting yourself first. Because I think
Yeah.
I was raised to put everybody else, think about everybody else. So I think that's what's going to run through my mind, is putting myself first.
The people pleasers.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we all been there. Don't even worry about it. Also love the coast. Love it.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I just video games. I love that as my retreat. I like putting my brain in my hands to a task. Um, also for me, like when I do tasks that are menial, um, I usually like to sing while I like fold laundry or whatever. So for me, the singing bit is kind of my self-care because I just love music. So I can really sneak that in whenever I'm doing anything. So that is an easy one for me.
Yeah, I have with a lot of you guys, it's really just putting myself first, and working on boundaries, I will say. Trying to set those, because probably do I forgot to say that like Italian, Palestinian, that's my cultural origin. But yeah, just minimize growing up and having mental health a little minimized a little bit on one side. Um, it kind of shows up with people pleasing, right? And
Hmm.
so I'm working on that, trying to set boundaries, and you have to have that mentality where if you need to make sure you take care of yourself so you can take care of others in your
Yeah.
profession. So yes, that's oh, and also burnout. Make sure you got to take care of yourself so you don't get burnt out too.
Yeah. I feel the same as all of you. I think for me also it's coming to terms with the fact that my self-care sometimes doesn't look like self-care. Like sometimes I need to clean my room or something, do laundry to feel better, but I'm like, no, I need to relax. And then I end up just feeling worse after not doing anything all day than I would have if I just did my responsibilities, I guess. But yeah, I think that's probably going to be the hardest part for me, but I'm working on it. So
It's interesting because it's like we get these messages about what self-care is, but it's like those are meant for a wide audience to get as many people to understand that this is something important as possible. But like ultimately you have to decide what self-care looks like for you. Nobody can tell you what that looks like. It's something that has to come from you. And if it doesn't, then it's just another thing you have to do because somebody told you to do,
yeah, well
you
said.
know?
That's exactly how it feels.
All right. I think that's
So
everything. Yeah.
I think so. We went a little bit over, but that's fine. It's as good as we're gonna get. So, all righty.